Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Jensen. I'm the IoT product manager for Canonical. We're the makers of the Ubuntu operating system. There we go. I'm here today to talk about robotics and IoT devices and the way forward in an increasingly hostile internet security environment. I've broken my talk into three sections. First, I'm going to give a brief overview of the security landscape today, and then we're going to talk about how we're attempting to solve these problems using our new device and robotics-focused operating system, Ubuntu Core. And in the end, we'll focus in on some of the more interesting features and capabilities of our Snaps and Snapcraft platform. So if you happen to be like me and you read the security news on a daily basis, you've probably had a surreal feeling for the past several years or more. It seems like every few weeks or even sometimes every few days, you hear news of some new ransomware, some new huge data breach, some new IoT botnet that is making headlines. And in the worst case, it could be a massive new state-sponsored malware that's wreaking havoc to the tune of hundreds of millions in damages. These things are relatively new in the history of technology, but we don't see any signs that this trend will decrease anytime soon. The quote that I chose to highlight here is from a report recently issued by F5 Labs. We'll talk more about that on a future slide again, but this quote I think is important to set the tone for this part of the talk, that every company, and for the people here, this includes hobbyists, researchers, and the community at large, needs to be thinking more about security in every aspect of the work that you're doing. We won't have time to even touch on the specific threats because there are so many. So instead, I've chosen to focus on some of the reactions that we're seeing in the government and the security sector itself. First thing I want to highlight is noted security researcher and author Bruce Schneider recently wrote a blog that was effectively a call to arms for the world's governments to step in and begin regulating the Internet of Things. This is a little bit of a departure. Normally, the tech industry for decades now has been very much hands-off, leave us alone, don't stifle innovation, and I think things have reached a tipping point now where we're starting to see that change. And to that point, just this week, December 10th, the EU approved a measure to strengthen the powers of ENISA and the Cybersecurity Act. I don't know how many of you saw that, but last year they released a voluntary compliance measure. They've now strengthened the agency and the act itself. I personally believe that we're heading towards a mandatory security compliance scenario, and possibly even as early as next year. You can expect, if that happens, that robots, particularly in scenarios that are capable, even hypothetically, of causing humans harm, and other similar industries with those kind of risks will be the first on the list for mandatory compliance. Moving on, again, I want to highlight this F5 Labs report once more. The shifting background is a little distracting. If you're looking to get caught up to speed on the IoT security landscape, I would highly recommend you start there. It's very comprehensive. The last piece I want to highlight, I don't know, by raise of hands, did anybody see the Wired article in August? So you probably weren't too happy about it, I'm guessing. The article was entirely dedicated to ROS and how it's completely insecure, was the gist of the article. You may think that it was a little bit one-sided. I happen to see that perspective myself, but nevertheless, I feel like they did raise some good points in there, and there's one quote in particular that I wanted to kind of close out with. That security going forward for all types of IoT devices, and especially robotics, needs to be considered from the beginning of the project and not something that you assume will be solved at a later stage. So with that, let me get into how we are trying to help. We have a new operating system called Ubuntu Core. It's designed from the ground up for Internet of Things devices and including robots. Before I tell you more about the features and capabilities of our OS, though, I want to take a moment and talk about the usual way that a robotics project or devices project kicks off. And we actually heard very similar things from the previous speaker. So it's just reinforcing our experiences as well. Very often when you're starting a new project, you have an idea or a thesis or something that you're working on, and you don't even know if it's possible. So your perception of the setup of the project is that you need to get through that part as quickly as possible and get to the important stuff, right? Get to the experiment that you want to try to do, the thing you want to validate, the market assertion that you want to test. And so what that leads to is cutting a lot of corners at the beginning and getting a build environment set up that maybe has a lot of manual steps, maybe it's cobbled together from a bunch of different pieces, but it works, and as you use it, you develop a sort of muscle memory, right? All the little things that you do every time you redo the build, you learn it and you kind of forget about it and it fades into the background while you're working on that project. But what you don't realize, unless those of you who've been down this road multiple times already, is that you're signing up for, if you ever ship this thing to anybody, a long-time commitment to software delivery. And to really deliver on that part, you need to understand, just for beginning examples, knowledge of Linux internals, knowledge of packaging. And if you get all that right, you're not done. That's just the sort of starting gate. You're signed up to maintain this project as long as somebody is using it. The risk there is effectively unbounded. It can be very time-consuming and costly even in the normal case, and the risks in worst-case scenarios are not something we need to go into, but certainly serious in the security climate we've been talking about. So this is the image that I've chosen for a story that we hear all too frequently. Very often when people come to us to want to learn how Ubuntu Core can help solve their problems, they have an existing, maybe legacy product out in the market, and the build environment has been mothballed, right? It's sitting somewhere on some developer's workstation, possibly someone who doesn't even work at the company anymore, and somebody has to go in and sort of open the hatch and climb down in there and remember how everything worked, right? And all that muscle memory that you developed when you put that system together is gone, or you're not even the person who put it together in the first place. In some of the most dire examples that we find, the first time you run this old build environment, it doesn't even compile anymore. Or worse, it compiles something that doesn't match your current stable binary. So now you're in no man's land. You can try to go in and fix it, but very often you don't have the resources. So you go in, you make the single changes you went in there for, you produce a new binary, and you just hope for the best. I won't be the first person to tell you, though, that hope is not an effective strategy. I'm going to tell you now about how we've attempted to build an operating system coupled with a cloud package management service to solve these problems. This is an overview of what I'm about to tell you, and the next few slides will go into the main features of Ubuntu Core in some detail. Probably the most fundamental aspect of Ubuntu Core is the application confinement. Applications are strictly confined from each other and the operating system, and they have minimized predefined writable areas for each application. So the overall attack surface available to malicious exploits is greatly minimized versus a standard Linux system. All Linux systems have package management by and large today. But the problem is, if you have any privileged user running on the system, they are free to download any tarball and untar it anywhere on the platform. So at a minimum, you've got binaries you know nothing about running on there, and in the worst case, they could overwrite some parts of /user, and then you don't know what's going on. We'll go into more detail later on, but Ubuntu Core provides a way to know exactly what's running on your system at any time and even audit that. The next important feature is related to our Snapcraft platform. We provide direct integration with your existing CI/CD system for those of you who have one. Attending this conference, I get the sense that there's a whole spectrum of progress with regards to using CI/CD to develop your robots today. Let me just take a moment to strongly encourage you to gain some expertise in that area. It's a fundamental requirement in order to deliver the types of continuous maintenance and updates you're going to need. The good news for those of you using open source, running open source projects, is that we've made it very easy. You're probably aware that both GitHub and Travis CI are available free for open source projects. And we've got direct integration to those tools already available for you. There's just go to build.snapcraft.io to get started. And you can plug Snapcraft directly in, and the snaps will start popping out every time that you push an update through that system. For those of you running closed source, we also have a solution. We have a Snapcraft CLI combined with publishing APIs available to integrate to whatever CICD system you choose to use, be it commercial, GitHub and Travis, or something else. Once you've got that set up, it enables a very cool set of features where you can actually have different channels and tracks for the different devices you have out in the field. So your test devices you may want to keep on the edge track here, so it always gets the latest bleeding edge, and you can test out all your new algorithms or features or whatever it may be on a continuous basis. We have other releases here available to you and your customers. Some customers may choose to run on beta or candidate, and what this amounts to is a slider where you can change the relationship on a per device or group of device basis between risk and feature availability. For any robot you have out there where you want to push the latest features out, you can push them down into these other channels, and maybe for your standard customers, you keep them up on stable there. Another key feature that we provide out of the box is transactional updates. What this means is that if any update to the system fails or stalls out or is broken for whatever reason, the system will detect that and automatically roll back to the last known good state, giving you the opportunity to try again. This is important in all scenarios, but it becomes critically important when you're managing remote devices or even a global network of devices. Another use case where we find this being highly valued is robots operating in dangerous environments. So this could be nuclear power plants. This could be manufacturing facilities that are extremely high temperature or use dangerous chemicals. When you start thinking about robots operating in those kind of scenarios, the picture I showed you isn't even a metaphor anymore. For all we know, that guy in that orange suit was going down that hole to fix a piece of broken equipment. So we've built these transactional updates into our operating system to try to keep any human involvement with your IoT devices, direct hands needing to touch the device, to an absolute minimum. These are, once again, the features that I've just gone through. To summarize the goal here, we're aiming to deliver a foundational operating system for robotics and other IoT devices that you can learn once and deploy for all of your projects, and you don't have to worry about that part anymore. You don't have to try to keep up on whatever the latest technologies, whatever people are hacking together on top of Yocto or whatnot. This will just work the same way that those of you already using Ubuntu Desktop for your development machines, Ubuntu Server in the cloud, it just works. And that leaves you free to focus on whatever your great idea was, whatever your value add, whatever your market that you wanted to test is. You can get right to that part and not have to worry about down the road becoming a victim of your own success. I'm not going to go into today, in the interest of time, the entire process of creating a snap. The reason is it's very easy. We've got great tutorials online. For those of you who are interested, I would strongly encourage you to go check them out. I just wanted to show you this one piece to get a sense of how simple it is. The first step in creating a new snap is to define the YAML file. It's a very simple declarative YAML language, and it only requires the 4 stanzas that you see here by default. And as I mentioned, the rest of the tutorial we have online will walk you through the remaining parts, but this is actually the hardest part. Next, I want to focus on some of the other advantages of using Ubuntu Core beyond simply the features of the platform itself. And the number one for us is it's backed by Canonical. So odds are a lot of you are already using Ubuntu on the desktop, possibly also in the cloud. We've been supporting those platforms for many years, over a decade. And we're delivering exactly the same level of support for Ubuntu Core. You can know when you choose our operating system that we're going to be publishing security updates for as long as you need them for the version that you've selected for your robotics projects. Another thing I just want to highlight is the size of our developer community. We have one of the largest developer communities in the world, and interestingly now, we've reached a critical mass where we're actually seeing companies like hospitals, insurance companies, banks, coming to us to buy Ubuntu Desktop because they've learned that the best developers, actually I shouldn't say that, a lot of developers, I don't want to offend anybody, a lot of developers run Ubuntu Desktop and have a strong preference for it, and it's actually a decision point for them. If they learn that a certain job offers Ubuntu Desktop, they're more likely to go there. Now, what this means for you as a developer, if you're already using Ubuntu on your desktop, is that you can actually prototype your snaps for your robot directly on your desktop and run them on your desktop to prototype the basic functionality. We also have a core running in a KVM environment, so you can then move directly to the virtualized environment and develop all your software there, and as the final stage, push the exact same snap to your robot platform, even if it's not Intel. I understand most of you are using Intel, but we actually support as well developing the code directly on your Intel PC and then pushing to, for example, a Raspberry Pi later if you want. Another thing worth highlighting, in addition to supporting ROS, the Ubuntu ecosystem supports a huge variety of other languages and frameworks. This will come in handy for robotics because most robots these days have to be connected to something, and it's going to be a lot easier for you if you can build all the components at once, again, using snaps. So you can use, this is just a small sample of the languages and frameworks that we support for developing tooling around your robots, support tools for you or your customers to use, or cloud management tools, or even just a simple service in the cloud that the robot pushes data up to for analytics. So I want to end this section by just saying that we at Canonical heart ROS. If anybody here is using Ubuntu today or considering it for your future product, please come and talk to me. We actually, or my colleagues, we have 5 or 6 of us here, and we'd love to hear from you about what you're doing, and especially if you have questions about how we can support you along longer time frames or anything like that, please come and talk to us. I'm going to see how much time I got here. Okay. I have a few more slides to talk about some of the additional cool features and capabilities you get from choosing Ubuntu Core just by virtue of the direct integration with Snapcraft. One thing that's interesting to look at first is this is a diagram of the actual architecture of a snap. Snaps are SquashFS archives, and using AppArmor, we use AppArmor to enable the confinement that I mentioned earlier. So you can see here the snaps are confined to writing to these 4 writable areas. In addition, we've enabled full access controls on all the various system resources, such as the /temp and /home directories, devices, and so forth. This slide is not much to look at, but I think it's going to be pretty interesting to a lot of you. There's 3 sort of features that come together to form a really interesting proposition in terms of maintaining robots in commercial environments. The first is automatic security warnings. So if you add a single flag to the YAML example that I showed you earlier, you'll enable a service we provide that automatically scans all the dependencies of your snaps, and every time a security update is available, it will push you an automatic notification. It might not sound like much, but for those of you who've ever been in a situation where a new 0-day just came out for Linux, which happens, incidentally, Microsoft had another one just this morning. It's less than 4 hours old, I think. So it's another patch cycle for those poor Windows admins. But anyway, happens for Linux too. And when your customer calls you demanding a timeline, the best answer you can possibly give is that you're already testing the fix, which you can do if you were notified about it via these automated alerts for all of your packages. The next one is the ability to audit, as I mentioned earlier. The Ubuntu Core operating system, by virtue of snaps, is essentially frozen in time. And you can go back at any point in time and query that device directly and ascertain that it is exactly in the state that you left it the last time that you touched it, whether it was to push out an update or whatever it was. Auditability is critically important in a lot of industries that are highly regulated by the government, and we can expect, the way things are headed, that it's only going to become more so. The final piece is license compliance management. This is another kind of victim of your own success kind of thing, where if you've got a product that takes off and is very successful, you want to ensure that you have zero potential possibility of ever getting sued. So we're investigating now a feature that would automatically tarball up all your source code, again, with your consent, tarball up all your source code and track all the open source licenses and keep track of all of that. So when one of those people who tend to make a career out of lawsuits comes knocking at your door, you have the defense mechanism ready to go. The last couple things I want to highlight in terms of interesting advantages. We offer a Snap Store. Those of you who are using Ubuntu already will probably be familiar with this. It's very popular on our desktop and also in server environments, but also for any consumer modifiable IoT device leverages the Snap Store as well. Where it gets really interesting for commercial robots is the notion of the brand store that we offered. So this is your own private store that creates a direct relationship between you and all of your customers and partners. And you can effectively create within that brand store as many product lines and models as you want, and even enable more advanced use cases where your partners can essentially reflash your devices and make it their own branded device and resell it on your behalf, for those of you who maybe have a little bit more elaborate business channels built out there. Wrapping up now, I want to leave you with a different vision. This is what we're striving for in contrast with the one that I showed you earlier. What we're trying to enable for you with Ubuntu Core is a world where maintenance doesn't go away entirely. It's still work that you have to do. You see, she's got her laptop there on the hammock. She's still working. But it's a process that you understand and you're not afraid of anymore, and it just fades into the background. I can almost guarantee you when you got up this morning and you flipped on a light switch and then later on stepped into the elevator, you never feared for your life. Those technologies, when they were invented, were actually extremely dangerous, both of them. But they're not anymore because people invested the engineering time to build these reliable frameworks to solve these problems. And I mean, these days we can all even safely go to the hardware store and purchase new light switches and rewire our house. And as long as we follow some basic rules, we're not going to kill ourselves. That's exactly our goal with Ubuntu Core and Snapcraft. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. If you're interested in learning more, I would encourage you to visit these two URLs, snapcraft.io and ubuntu.com/core.
Thank you, Eric.
You need the water.
We have time for questions to Eric. So, maybe one question from my side.
Yeah.
You have not talked about security levels. So in the manufacturing domain or in other domains, we talk about security levels 1, 2, 4, etc. Mm-hmm. Why did you omit these?
So we would address the security levels as an aspect of the Snap Store and Brand Store pieces that I mentioned. So you could have brand stores dedicated to the different security levels and manage it that way. Depending on the characteristics of the different levels as well, I think it would also relate to the channels and tracks that I mentioned of software. So probably the higher levels would block the edge and candidate type releases. So those things would be configured through Snapcraft and the Snap Store as an attribute of the device models on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. More questions? So there's one.
There's a mic right there.
I would have one question coming back to the core idea of the snaps. Mm-hmm. So it kind of sounds familiar to Docker for me. So what are the advantages or differences of your snap format to Docker?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the main advantages or differences are that our confinement method is actually lighter weight, so it's designed and optimized for smaller footprint IoT devices, and also the direct integration with Snapcraft. So Docker containers by itself don't get you all the management features that we just went through. I will point out, though, however, that we definitely acknowledge the value of Docker containers at the edge, and we've already enabled use cases where you can, if it's already part of your workflow, you can ship Docker containers through snaps, so you get all of the maintenance and update advantages that we went through while still using your Docker containers. So you have that choice as well.
So there's one question over here.
I can probably just hear you directly. We're not that far apart.
Okay, thanks. Is it possible to also use your own server for this? I mean, some people will probably gladly use the service, but run it on their own servers?
We're heading in that direction. We wanted to enable the default use case first and make it work very well on the cloud. So that's what we did. Today we have a proxy available for network-constrained environments, and there are plans to extend that proxy to become a full-fledged, essentially a Snapcraft server that you would be able to run on your own. So not today, but something that we're considering.
There was a question over here.
On the other side.
Can you tell something about the steps you have to take to, for example, use Yocto or Open Embedded to make images out of these systems? Is it already done, or is that something you have to start doing yourself?
We support a large number of Linux environments for snaps. I want to say it's 40? It's a lot. Dozens, anyway, including Yocto. So you can run snaps on those environments. What we've not done yet is actually snap up the operating system itself to get that confinement piece. We're pretty proud of Ubuntu Core, and so we would advocate for that. But certainly, if there was a strong need in that direction, it's something that we would be happy to talk more about.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. In any case, you will be available during the break and maybe also later on for more questions, or?
I'm here the rest of the day, and several of my colleagues are here for tomorrow as well.
I saw Loic somewhere.
Loic is here.
Right, yeah. Okay. So, again, thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you for your time.